John Reynolds had never been one for big crowds or loud noises. At 60, his life had become quieter, just the way he liked it. His world had shrunk to the walls of his modest home on the edge of town. The days had a familiar rhythm. A cup of coffee at dawn, a long walk with his dog Max, and the comfort of solitude that only grew stronger after his wife passed away 2 years ago. He hadn't expected to feel so hollow, but with and gone, the silence around him was unbearable. That was until Max came into his life. Max, a golden retriever with a tangled mane of fur, had been a puppy then, small, uncertain, and shy. John had rescued him from the shelter on an impulse. He had no plans for another companion after Anne, but something about Max's soft brown eyes and wobbly walk called to him. John had no idea at the time that this dog, who seemed so fragile, would become the only living thing capable of healing the ache in his chest. Through the years, they became inseparable. Max grew from a playful puppy to a loyal old soul by John's side. Every morning, they would take their walk through the park, John's stiff joints not bothering him as much as they once did, because Max was there, bounding ahead, sniffing around with an enthusiasm that made John smile, even on the days when everything seemed too heavy. But as time passed, John began to notice subtle changes. Max, who had always been so full of energy, now walked slower. He used to rush up the stairs after John, his tail wagging in rhythm with each step. Now he hesitated at the bottom, his eyes looking up at John as if asking for help. John brushed it off at first. He was getting older too, after all, but deep down he feared the inevitable. His dog was slowing down. It was one evening, after a particularly long day of errands, that John noticed the lump near Max's side. At first it was small, easy to ignore, but as days went on, it grew, pressing against Max's ribs, making it difficult for him to move as freely as before. John's heart sank with every passing day, knowing that time was running out. It wasn't just the lump. It was the way Max would sometimes stare at him, his eyes filled with quiet understanding, as though he knew the end was coming. When John finally took Max to the vet, he didn't know what to expect, but he dreaded hearing what the doctor had to say. The vet's voice was gentle but firm as she explained that the tumor was malignant. It had spread quickly, and there was little they could do. Max's time was limited. John sat in stunned silence as he processed the news. The idea of losing Max, losing the last piece of his old life, was too much to bear. He clutched Max's paw tightly, the tears welling up before he could stop them. Max looked up at him, offering the same quiet comfort he always had, his head resting against John's leg, as if trying to tell him that everything would be okay. But John knew it wouldn't be. The hardest part wasn't the diagnosis. It was knowing that his best friend, the one who had been with him through every lonely night, was fading away. As the weeks went by, John tried to make every moment count. He pampered Max, giving him his favorite treats and letting him sleep on the couch beside him instead of his dog bed. He spent hours sitting on the porch swing, Max resting his head on John's lap as they both watched the sunset. They had shared so many quiet moments like that over the years, so many moments that had meant more than words ever could. But now it felt like each one might be the last. Max's body grew weaker, and his energy dwindled. The walks became shorter, and there were days when Max couldn't even make it to the front door before he had to stop and rest. John knew he had to make a choice, but even with the pain of watching Max suffer, he couldn't bear to say goodbye. He couldn't imagine a life without the comforting weight of Max's body beside him on the couch, without the sound of his nails clicking on the hardwood floors, or the way Max would press his head against John's leg as if asking to be petted. It was one evening, as the snow began to fall outside, that John finally made the call to the vet. He couldn't let Max suffer anymore. He wanted him to go peacefully, in the home that they had shared for so many years, where Max had always felt safe. John held Max in his arms, whispering to him about all the good times they'd had, about the days filled with laughter and love, about how much he had meant to him. He promised him he would never forget. Max's breathing slowed, and his eyes grew heavy. John's chest tightened as the reality of the situation set in, but he stayed calm, stroking Max's fur one last time. With a soft sigh, Max let go, his body relaxing as he passed away quietly, peacefully, with the man he loved beside him. John didn't cry immediately. He sat there, holding Max, not knowing how to let go. The house felt cold without the warmth of his dog beside him. The silence was deafening. But over the following days, as John sat alone in the living room, he remembered the best parts of Max. The way he used to chase after squirrels in the park. The way he would curl up at John's feet in the evenings. The way his tail would wag furiously when John came home. Those memories were now treasures, pieces of a life that would never be forgotten. Eventually, John found solace in the memories. He realized that Max hadn't just been a dog. He had been his best friend, his companion through the hardest moments of his life. And in those quiet, reflective moments, John began to heal. He volunteered at the local shelter, walking other dogs who needed homes. And though they couldn't replace Max, it gave him something to look forward to. Some nights, when the stars were bright and the world seemed still, John would look up and swear he could feel Max's presence beside him, as though his loyal friend was still watching over him. He'd smile to himself, knowing that Max was always with him, not in body, but in spirit. And so life went on. But John knew he would never forget the love of the dog who had filled his life with meaning, and whose love had melted his heart over and over again, for every precious day they had shared.